Good evening, everybody. Eric Hayden from the Weather Service in Morehead City, joined again by Sarah Jameson. We're going to go through the briefing in a second. Just want to go over some of the reports that we've gotten into the office thus far. Encourage you folks to report them on to us when you can do so. Starting to get some high wind gusts as some of the outer bands continue to come far, with Cedar Island at 89 miles per hour, Beaufort 71 mile per hour peak wind, and North River a 70 mile per hour gust. Cherry Point 72, Avon 74. So getting some impressive winds with this. We've seen some pictures of surge. We don't know quite as much about that, but we certainly will see that more as we head through the night, at least of the wind, and that's still coming just before 5 o'clock. 76 mile per hour winds at Diamond Shoals. So just to give you an idea of some of the reports that we've gotten. The radar is up there. You can see the circulation of Florence. The reason why I want to show you the radar, a couple reasons. We mentioned impacts well away from the center itself. You folks up on the Outer Banks, you're getting these far outer bands. We had issued a tornado warning for a cell with one of these. Remind you that these bands could produce quick spin-up tornadoes. We'll highlight that in the briefing in a second. And then the other thing, when we get these bands rotating onshore, periods of much heavier rain and also very, very gusty winds. So that will continue through the night into the day tomorrow. You folks inland, you haven't maybe seen the heavy rain quite as much as we have at the coast. You're certainly not out of the woods. Those bands are rotating back toward you. And we'll talk about this with the track moving that much. That's going to continue just a slow movement toward the coast through the night tonight and through the day tomorrow. So emphasizing the impacts that we're seeing will continue and will linger across our area. So that's a little update with the radar. The briefing should be in your email. It's also on the website for folks that do not have it in their email box. No major changes, just a few minor adjustments to the wind threat graphics, a couple of adjustments to the rainfall amounts, but the message is the same: life-threatening impacts from wind, surge, catastrophic impacts from flooding rain, flash flood, and river flood, and we mentioned the tornado threat as well. This is unchanged as well, extreme impacts from those I just mentioned, so again, largely unchanged. As far as the latest track is concerned, not a lot of movement. Max winds are 100 miles per hour, but this is why we always preach, don't just focus on the category. That is only wind related. Impacts such as surge, heavy rain, tornadoes have nothing to do with the category. Tropical storm and hurricane force wind field is quite large. The latest amounts that we saw continue to indicate that hurricane force winds extend 80 miles from the center, and tropical storm force winds extend just under 200 miles from the center. So again, very, very large storm, an excellent illustration that we'll see impacts far away from the center, and for folks not to just focus on the forecast cone itself. Storm surge threat unchanged. That's why the storm surge warnings remain in effect. As far as the amounts, still looking 9 to 13 feet from Cape Fear up to Cape Lookout, again including the Noose and Pamlico. So these amounts are unchanged up through Ocracoke 6 to 9, and then Ocracoke to Salvo, Rodanthe area 4 to 6. So these are unchanged from before. The one change, the wind threat graphic, you'll notice is a little lower in terms of we don't have the extreme on this map, and that's because the wind values have lowered a little bit. But still, substantial winds. We showed you, 89 mile per hour at Cedar Island. So we don't want you to think the trend is much lower, but a little bit lower with regards to winds specifically. Maximum sustained winds still, 40 to 50 miles per hour across the northern part of our area, but sustained winds 65 to near 80 down across the southern part of Onslow County. And one thing that this graphic does not capture, the duration. Again, we talked about that slow movement tonight, tomorrow, many hours of that sustained wind. And now that we have the rain, and that will continue because of that wet ground, tree issues, that'll just be more common as we head through the night. Maximum wind gust approaching 100, maybe down toward Topsail, North Topsail and the Crystal Coast, Emerald Isle, those types of places. Widespread power communication outages, we've already been seeing that. and that will continue through the night and tomorrow. So, as if that was not enough, we do have to deal with the flooding rain threat, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to speak a little bit more about that, and then we'll wrap up with the tornado threat and turn it over to you.
Okay, good evening everybody. Well, we're, like Eric was saying, we're kind of holding with our earlier briefing. The conditions have not dramatically changed. Things are still kind of in line with what we've been advertising for the last few days. The rainfall threat is most critical or extreme over more of our southern coastal counties with a tier or two inland to give a little bit of wiggle room there for some of these rain bands that could bring in that heavier rainfall. To our northern counties, you're not out of the woods. As we can see with the rain bands coming across the Outer Banks right now, that's going to be spreading more into your area. Flash flooding is a possibility. I can tell you that with some of these earlier bands, we've already seen amounts of 3 to 6 inches and growing. And this thing's only really just getting started with the rainfall total, since this will be a fairly long-lived event. So again, nothing's really changed from what we talked about earlier. I'm going to show you a little bit of a broader picture. This graphic is from one of the more national maps produced at a National Weather Service Center. And the reason I want to show you this in particular is that expanse of the really heavy rain continues to spread to our west, and that does include portions of the Tar and the Neuse basins. So some of that water will be routed downward into our area. So even if we don't get the rain directly overhead, there is the routed water to be of concern. Okay, now what I'm showing you now is the local rainfall forecast. Some slight adjustments from what the National Center puts out there, and we've customized that more for our local area. Obviously trying to account for some of these heavy rain bands that are going to move into those northern areas, which could easily put down a quick, 4 to 6 inches or greater. Still holding to that 20 to 30 inch rainfall total, just given the extremely slow forward motion of the storm. It's really slowed down here over the last few hours, and like I said, we're already seeing rainfall amounts over 6 inches down here in the Crystal Coast. So those numbers are only going to continue to grow, and as the storm approaches and gradually pushes west as they expect, that'll shift the axis of heaviest rain into our southwest counties there over Onslow, Duplin, clipping portions of Green, Lenore, Jones. So at least that's the current prediction. Those rainfall totals have not changed. A lot of the areas still facing around 1 foot to 2 feet and possibly over 30 or 40 inches of rainfall. Those are the extremes, but we're certainly not ruling it out given the extremely slow movement of this storm. Nothing has really changed in regard to our predictions for the rivers. Like I said, this is the very early onset of this event. We still have a long way to go before this is over and the rainfall has come to an end. The forecast is holding steady. We still think that we're going to be experiencing near record flooding potentially in some of these areas. That includes the Trent River, the New River, Swift Creek, and the Northeast Cape Fear. Those things are still holding steady. And again, I'm just going to kind of move on since nothing has really changed since we talked about that this morning. I'm going to go ahead and skip over that because we kind of already highlighted some of this. Just to highlight that Pollexville, we're already seeing the impacts of the storm surge causing that to flood. So that actually flooded a little earlier than we were anticipating, which is not a good thing since that was primarily wind driven. The rain hadn't really made its way up there. So that condition is just going to continue to be exacerbated here over the next 24 hours as the rain continues. So a lot of uncertainty with the rivers. Time will tell exactly how much rain falls in these basins, but the outlook is for the potential for major flooding, and that is certainly not isolated to those coastal counties, the Neuse River, the Tar River basins. Right now, again, we're looking at 1 foot or less in those basins at the current forecast, but that could very, very quickly change. So they're not out of the woods yet. I think we should be prepared for moderate and the potential of reaching major flood stage in those basins, though it's a little too early to tell if that's what's going to end up happening. And the same thing goes for the Contentnia Creek area. It's just on that very tight gradient of rainfall amounts. Whether or not that's going to see, is it going to be minor, moderate, or major? We're just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. Okay, and I think that's about all I need to say. Everything else kind of still holds from this morning.
All right, folks, we're just about to wrap this up. We showed you the radar image with the bands rotating onto the Outer Banks and the tornado warning issued earlier. So again, still the potential for several tornadoes, and that tornado watch continues through 9 o'clock tonight, and this will likely be extended. So no changes with that. So at this point, our next PDF briefing will be tomorrow morning by 7 o'clock. Encourage you, we're trying to put the recordings on YouTube, so if you miss it, if there's something you want to review again, or if you want to share it with others, give us a little time, but we'll get that up on YouTube, minus the question and answer part at the end, so you can certainly share that with everybody.